Service today is centered on the feeling of awe. And I was explaining this to my family. They first thought I meant like, aw, like we would have puppies and kittens around, which I actually think would be a lovely service, but that's not what's happening today. The feeling of awe is an emotional, physiological, and psychological response to stimuli that is often hard to understand by words and much more easily understood by experiencing. During our next hour together, we will attempt to do both. We will try to define what awe is and share some of the amazing scientific research of awe, and hopefully experience awe through the music shared with us today by the Blake House Band, which we are so excited. If awe is not experienced in this room today, I'll be very amazed. So first, what is awe?
The Oxford English Dictionary defines awe as a feeling of reverential respect mixed with fear or wonder.
A children's definition of awe from the website wordsmith.com explains awe is a very strong feeling of wonder mixed with respect or fear.
Dr. Keltner, Jonathan Haidt, two prominent researchers on awe, found that awe consists of two core qualities. One, perceived vastness, something we think to be greater than ourselves in number, scope, or complexity. Two, something that challenges or alters our understanding of the world.
Our expression of awe is rooted in the Greek word akos, which also gives us the word ache. The vastness we experience in awe opens an ache in our heart, and by doing so, expands it.
In essence, awe allows us to transcend the ordinary, tests our concept of time and scale, gives us the sense of being small in a grand universe, and helps us truly to be in the moment. Let us begin our exploration of awe with our gift of music.
Awe is one of the most complex emotions we experience as humans. A feeling of awe can be positive or negative, which is different than most emotions that we have. And it can arise from a really broad range of events in our lives. In a landmark 2003 paper, psychologists Keltner and Haidt presented a conceptual approach to awe. In this paper, they suggested that awe can be characterized by perceived vastness, but that it can come from observing something literally physically large, like standing on top of a mountain, or from something like art, or music, or nature, or even an act of kindness from another human being. When we feel small in the face of something large, we make room for a connection with vastness. We feel part of something larger than ourselves.
Today we're going to meditate on music. Sharon Horry writes, "Music will often make us feel like crying because we experience a sense of awe and admiration. Music makes us feel. This awe feeling is backed up by our sensitivity of what others are capable of creating and appreciating the greatness of humanity's talent. We are simply overwhelmed by such a power to move a soul and to undress the many layers of the human shield."
And now we'll get to hear a few short reflections on people's personal experiences of awe. And in your order of service, Lynna and Lex unfortunately weren't able to be there with us today. We have Al and Sue. And then just because it's so hard to get me to talk, I'm going to share my own personal experience on awe as well. So I'll invite Sue. It's out of order, everything.
It was December 31st, 1971, almost 46 years ago, and my husband Dave and I were living in Anchorage, Alaska. And on that morning, a little after 6, we and 2 other couples and our 2 dogs got into 2 cars and drove 100 miles north of Anchorage on the Glen Allen Highway. It was completely dark, of course, because at that time of the year in Anchorage, the sun comes up about 10 and goes down about 2. So we wanted to get to where we were going to park our cars just before the sun rose. And we managed that, and we got to a fellow's cabin. We had brought him a bag of groceries, and in exchange, we took the batteries out of our cars and put them in his cabin so that we would be able to start our cars when we came back the next day. Then we got our skis on, we had our cross-country gear with us, and we started off, the 6 people and the 2 dogs. The black lab mix loved the snow. The ornery little Dachshund Terrier was offended. And she rode in my husband's parka with her head sticking out below his chin. It was an interesting visual. So we skied in and up to a ridge where we were borrowing a beautiful A-frame cabin that had been lent to us by friends. And the cabin was on a ridge that overlooked a broad river valley. And the deck and all the windows oriented toward that view. There was fresh powder snow. So we skied in, which was mostly climbing up, and got to the cabin and started a fire. And then, then it was daylight. And we had all this wonderful fresh powder snow to break trails in. So we did. We made trails and skied down to the river, which was frozen, and across and back up. And we did this with all the daylight we had and somewhat into the darkness. And then we came back. We had packed chili and garlic bread, and we made a nice dinner for ourselves. Later on, we sang, we played cards, and later on in the evening, it was getting closer to midnight, and we looked out and we saw this strange light. It was so compelling. It was the Northern Lights, and it was the most fantastic array. The entire north sky was completely filled with these lights that reminded me of swaying curtains. They were green, they were silver, they were white. And none of us could stay in the cabin. You just had to be out there to feel it and to see it. And it came up midnight, and the guys who had been having quite a few sangria snow cones decided that it was possibly a good idea at midnight, since we didn't have hats or noisemakers, to howl like wolves. So they did for about a minute. And then the wolves howled back. For me, that was the most amazing New Year's Eve I've ever had.
And now Al will come speak.
Well, I puzzled as to what I would say, but then what Sue said reminded me of a strange incident. I was living in Libertyville, Illinois, and hanging out with some other musicians that we would go to a folk center on Fridays and Saturdays and just jam. But other times we'd go, we walked to the middle of a plowed field in October. The corn had all been harvested, and they had plowed the field, and they would plant in the spring. And I had a mountain dulcimer, and my friend Rob, who was a piano player, extraordinary, but he had one of those little thumb pianos that was, kind of the pocket piano, Yeah. And my friend Lynn Erickson had a recorder, and we strolled out in the middle of this field, and the sun was, starting to get low, and we started just kind of fooling around with what noises we could make in the silence of this October, kind of chilly October late afternoon. And somewhere in my archives, I have the recording of this, so it really happened if you want me to prove it. We were just jamming there and doing our thing, and it must have been 45 minutes or so. And we started, everything was quiet, but when we stopped, we realized we had been joined by the crickets.
So, this is a rather personal one. It was I think it was the year after my divorce, which all of you were able to support me through, which was amazing to have this experience of having this community. And yet, as you know, my ex-husband Michael and I had been together 16 years, and our whole lives intertwined, and then it dissolved. And it felt like every choice I had ever made didn't matter anymore. And it was probably the lowest I've ever felt as a person that summer. I felt I had failed my family, I had failed my son and myself. And I just didn't understand where I fit into the world anymore. I didn't know who I was without him, and I didn't know how I could move forward. And hiking in nature, I think, for a lot of us is that culmination. That's where I could find any piece of joy that I could grab onto that summer. And so I was hiking one of the long routes at Kamiak Butte. And it's that one point where you get above the trees, and it opens up, and you can see Steptoe Butte from where you're standing. And if you haven't been there, we should go. And I just stood there, and it was so beautiful. And the sky was that sky that we get in Moscow, that's that perfect blue with those clouds that look like someone painted them. And the breeze brought in the wildflower smell. I don't know what they are. You know what they are, and they're the big yellow ones. And I stood there for probably 5 full minutes, I couldn't believe that something so beautiful on earth existed, and that I could see it. And it was that moment that I realized that if the universe could make this, and it was that beautiful, but that I am also a part of the universe, and the universe chose to create me, that I was just as worthy and beautiful as that. And it was really the moment that I realized that I did belong in this world, and it was the beginning of my healing. It really was, to where I could start to find the person that I was at that moment and not who I used to be. And that's my experience of awe.